putting things chronologically, finished my 10th in 1982, and I joined a little summer class where an artist called Anand Mohan Naik was teaching us sculptures. There was me, my two sisters, one more friend, and he took us to the studio of a sculptor called Mr. Adi Davirwala. He was not alive at that moment, but the moment I stepped into the studio, the unfinished pieces, the metal, the welding equipment, the lines of chalk on the wall, the wood carvings, some of the shavings still left there, and everything looked as if someone had left something incomplete and someone needed to pick it up and take it forward. And if you talk about a trigger point, that is one time when I decided what I wanted to do. It was that quick. Just to see that studio, the smell of the metal, everything around there triggered me to sort of get a welding machine myself and start experimenting and putting bits and pieces of metal together into what I call sculptures. So I kept on doing this and only wanted to do it, didn't want to do anything else day in and day out. But my parents were a little worried. I mean, you don't see a kid only sitting in a metal scrapyard welding day in and day out and getting stuff at home. There was a lot of encouragement there, but there was also a warning that I should have some sort of a degree, some sort of a education as such, and that's how architecture happened. And it seemed to be the most sort of, how you say, the right thing to get into at that time, because both of them were 3D arts, and dad being an architect, I just went into architecture then. So architecture started in 85. I started sculpting in 82. That's how the whole architecture thing happened. So if I go back to my friends who were with me in architecture, a couple of years back and forth, my class, I realized that so many of them are not practicing architecture. I'm a sculptor. My last architectural project was 3 years back probably. I've not stopped it entirely, but if something is very interesting to trigger off a creative process within me, I will take that job, So there are so many of them who've changed. There is one I know who only does modeling for other architects, not modeling as in wearing clothes, but making architectural models. And there is someone who's become a photographer. I know one phenomenal architect who would have been one of the partners in a leading firm today in India. He suddenly took to ceramics and he's become one of the topmost ceramic artists in the country today. So my advice to sort of students who want to change streams midway or afterwards or whenever is that it has to become very naturally from you, and it's not a whimsical thing that one day you wake up and you say, oh fine, architecture is too difficult, let me try my hand at something else. It's not like that. You have to be so passionate about that one thing which you want to take up, dropping architecture or practicing it with it, that it has to become literally like a fire within you which says that you have to do this and you will not rest till you do it. So when you have that compulsion within you, when you have that passion within you, then everything that you do becomes sort of understandable to others around you. Of course your family is going to object, of course people are going to object, people are going to say, what is he doing suddenly dropping this and taking this? But if you justify yourself, then I think the others around you will sort of kind of agree that it is okay to switch from one to the other. And remember, doing architecture is phenomenal for any other art, because architecture is called the mother of all arts, and there is a certain sense of scale, a sense of understanding which architecture puts into you, which will make it very easy for you to understand the other forms of art. So when you're doing something which is completely not done, like taking scrap metal and welding it together into sculptures and going to scrap yards, going to garages, moving around with soiled clothes in the colony, carrying some metal strap from here and there, you get resentment, and that resentment should in fact fire you. I remember there was one time when midway I went into the RTI, the sandwich shop, to pick up a sandwich when I was working on some project which involved me to stay at the studio continuously. And I went in there, and then some old Parsi gentleman looked me up and down, and he said, I wouldn't be caught dead looking like you. And I mean, someone might take insult to that, but I was very happy. I knew that I had worked for it. And the more soiled I got towards the end of the day, the better it was. There were so many old Parsis coming up to me and saying, are you off your mind? You know, see your dad, see your mom. Your mom's running a nursery. Your dad has such a big office, doing such fabulous architecture. Why don't you go there? Sort of, you know, this looks bad. And oh, a young Parsi boy like you only welding away day in and day out. But that sort of flamed me more. And of course, hats off to my mom and dad who supported the entire journey through and through. Tremendous encouragement from them. Although they did put me into architecture, that was a prerequisite. The amount of support I got in terms of machines, in terms of the space, in terms of guiding me, in terms of doing my first show was tremendous. So that is something that has to be remembered and kept in mind always. So basically people ask me, has studying architecture helped you in your sculptures? Yes, it has. But I always feel that when I do my architectural projects, interior projects, whatever, my theories of sculpture help me better to do my architecture than the other way around. So there are some times when sites are far off and maybe abroad somewhere, and the architect sends me drawings, okay? Now, not being an architect would have been a deterrent for me to understand stuff like that. But the moment you see a plan and you see an elevation, although in those times there were the 3D computer renderings were not there. So from flat 2D drawings, I could somehow visualize a 3D space, which was wonderful. And that, I think, architecture helped me. Architecture helps me also seeing a space which a client shows me, and to realize that this is what is needed to be put here to sort of enhance the space. So yes, definitely architecture has helped me tremendously in understanding the value of space, in understanding the physicality of the space, into how much it has to be filled, into what material has to be used to contrast or match the surroundings, whatever the requirement is at that time. To me, art is very simple. It is something that pleasures you. It's like a movie. It's like a movie. You see a good movie, you come out happy, fine. It's done its work. It's an art as well. So to me, art is something that triggers something in you, not always happiness. There have been some artists who have very dark subjects and which triggers some sort of an emotion in you. If by looking at that piece, you are able to emote what the artist wants you to, then that is a good piece of art. Also, there is this thing that people keep on asking me so many times. I don't understand modern art, so I don't go into art galleries and all that. And I say to them, keep it simple. Don't try to read too much into what critics have written about art, because that comes at a slightly later stage. First, learn to visually appreciate it. Look at a piece of art and very simply ask yourself, do you like it or not? Would you have it in your home or office or not? Do you love it or not? Once you have that visual connect with the piece, then art becomes simpler. Of course, go into the details later, read what the critics have said and all that, but initially don't bog yourself down with such heavy, armor to the piece which is attached, so that you are not able to appreciate it. Appreciate it with a lot of simplicity. Keep yourself sort of as innocent as a child when you're seeing a painting for the first time, and say you like it, you love it, you hate it, fine. Anything is okay. There can be no two same views to a painting. You keep 10 people in front of it, they'll give you 10 different markings for one sort of work of art. So keep art simple, and art is something which has to stir something in you, and it does. Good art will do that. When I'm shown an architectural space where a sculpture needs to be put, it's not just doing a pen line drawing of a design. That design, number one, has to have the right scale to fit into that environment. If it's an open traffic island, the scale needs to go large. If it's a residence, the scale needs to be in tune with the kind of house that it is. Whether it's a double height lobby or it could be just a side table where a piece is sitting on, the scale is very important. Number two, the material. If it's a corporate open air sculpture, I use stainless steel. If it's an residential sculpture, I use wood to get a little warmth into it, maybe a little copper. So it's not just a pencil drawing, it's basically a thought which sort of dwells into the scale, the material, the finish, the texture, and most importantly, the subject as well. The subject has to go with the place that you're putting it in. Okay, you can't have a very sharp stainless steel corporate looking sculpture inside a residence. It doesn't work, and vice versa. I remember doing a sculpture of a mother and child for a residence, and I keep giving a lot of lectures to students, and I tell them, imagine this piece in a very prismatic stainless steel reflective surface. It would lose its warmth completely, and hence the material, the way you sort of contour the surfaces, no sharp angles, where you need the sharp angles is very important. So everything put together is very important for you to create the perfect sculpture for a client which he'll fall in love with. Okay, understanding of the client is also important. Sometimes clients like abstract, sometimes they do not, and they give you a brief that they don't like sharp angles and all that. To me, it is wonderful to have such inputs, because then you reach the final design faster. And taking all this into consideration, when you put up that final piece and the client loves it, you have achieved your goal tremendously. I'll give you an idea. There was this piece which I did for the Navy. It was sponsored by the ex-fighter pilots who flew from the decks of INS Vikrant. And there was such a strong emotion there, because the INS Vikrant was destroyed by the government and sold per kg. It was sold as scrap. There was no emotional value added to it. It was sold like a piece of scrap metal which was just sort of lying waste on the shores, but it was not. It had a lot of emotional attachment for a lot of people who were on the decks of the Vikrant when the war was going on. They would fly out in the mornings, perhaps come back with their bombers back again, settle down within the ship, and they told me that the ship was like a mother to them. It was like they would go out into dangerous times and come back, and when they would be on the decks of the Vikrant, they would be very secure. And they got together, they pooled in their money and took me to the scrapyard where the Vikrant was being scrapped. I selected the scrap with them, and then from that we made a piece which is a memorial to the Vikrant, which is standing now at Colaba on the traffic island opposite the Lions Gate. So there you have an emotional attachment. There you have a design sensibility. And I told them that I'm not making a model of the Vikrant. I'm not going to create a 2-scale model of the Vikrant that anyone can do. Any engineer can do that. What I did was I semi-abstracted the Vikrant. I sort of gave it a grander appearance, and we sort of hoisted it on a deck. We actually used each and every part from the Vikrant to sort of commemorate the Vikrant. So it's a wonderful thing which is put out there, dedicated to the Vikrant, dedicated to the city of Mumbai. If you really want to know how art and architecture are closely combined, you need to look at Art Temple architecture. To me, the finest example is the Kailasha Temple at Ellora. It is a marvel of architecture, which is also a sculpture. There is no added elements onto it. There was no cement mortar used. The artist, the architect, the engineers who must have perceived it saw this one large rock and decided to carve it down into a temple complex. Not even one temple, into a whole temple complex, where you have the entranceway, you have the stambhas, you have the main temple, you have the shrines, you have the staying quarters for the priests, and it is amazing. So art and architecture to me are extremely close, and they go hand in hand totally. In fact, I did my thesis on in architecture in the last year, in the final year, called Sculpture and Architecture. and sort of I gave examples of how sculptures look around architecture, how it makes a difference to the architecture, and how some of the buildings become sculptures themselves. My example was the Sydney Opera House, and the TWA terminal at JF, next to JFK. And it's wonderful how these brilliant architects took a theme and sort of literally made it work like sculpture. Closer to home, of course, Nari Gandhi was one of the pioneers in that, and he had not even, sometimes he didn't even have drawings to give the architects. He would start directly on the land, walking and saying, okay, I take my first wall from here to there and all that, like a true artist. And it is inbuilt. You see our temples, you see Hampi, just go to one of the heritage sites in India and see how just one column is a prime example of architecture and sculpture combined together, art and architecture combined together. There is so much to see in just one column, and so much to learn from that just one column and beam structure, that it is phenomenal. And here we are talking of full temples and temple complexes and palaces and everything. Art and architecture are linked together. You cannot separate them from one another. Just as a timeline, not during the lockdown times right now, but just as a timeline, my time at the studio is generally from 9 in the morning to 1:30 lunchtime, and then again from 2:30 to 5. So that has been my working structure all through. Of course, there are exceptions. When there are exhibitions, I have stayed there overnight, sometimes late, sometimes you go early, sometimes you don't come back home. But generally, this is the schedule that I follow. And to me, doing some sort of physical work, not saying that my sculpture is not physical work, but more physical work which allows me to, go away from the sculptures that I make. You need that. It is a beautiful process to create and to design, but when you're doing it continuously, you have to give yourself breaks. It could be anything. It could be something that you enjoy doing, like what I do. A filmmaker also needs to go on a holiday. Just because he enjoys filmmaking doesn't mean he does that 24 hours throughout the year. So to me, these little pockets come in form of doing jigsaw puzzles, which I love. I do very, very large jigsaw puzzles. Currently, the one I'm doing is 18,000 pieces. Technically, I'm not doing it. I've packed it away because I don't have the space to open out 18,000 pieces and do it at the moment. I have completed a 8,000 and a 5,000 sometime back. Very relaxing. My yoga is very essential for me. It sort of levels you out. This is not a very high pranayamic yoga. It's Iyengar yoga, so it's again physical. And cycling, I have again started cycling a lot. And of course, a little bit of running around and doing stuff that just somehow takes your mind off what you're doing continuously. Don't be alarmed that when you see a space, when someone shows you a space and says design for it, the moment you see that space, your mind has already started working on it. Just because you're exercising and you're doing your yoga doesn't mean you cut off from your work totally. The mind has this overall capacity to keep everything in. You just minimalize one part of the thinking process and expand the other so that it relaxes the other one. You understand? It's like this one space where you have everything inside, and as far as possible, don't think of disturbing things, because that also takes a space in your mind. So minimize that, maximize the creative process, and you'll find life is much more enjoyable that way. Managing time is a superb thing. It's like I have known the busiest people taking on more work than people who are not. You understand what I'm saying? So to me, very frankly, busy is a state of mind, and you need to fit in a lot more of these things to somehow make your life more, wonderful, how to make your life more creditable. And it is how you manage it and how you put things together. There is a finite amount of time that you have, but if you manage it well, believe me, you can do a lot many more things, and you can still have time for 10 more things if you manage it properly. So being busy is a state of mind. There are so many people I know not doing anything who say they are very busy, but when you sort of ask questions and you probe further, you'll find out that what they're doing is just 1/10 of what you're doing anyway on a regular day. So it's totally all here, how much you want to devote time to what. Coming to one of the most prominent pieces of mine, which is the dolphins at Worli. I'll tell you how this happened. And when I look back at how we made it, I don't think it can happen again. It's just sometimes everything in the universe sort of comes together to make things happen. This was just one of those things. So the client called me to his office, took me to the traffic island, showed it to me. He's saying, I want dolphins. That's it. He didn't give me a chance to design or think of a subject for it. He said, I want dolphins here. And it seemed appropriate to me. It's by the seaside, they're nice and playful, excellent form. I can play around with it. So I quickly went back to the studio, did a sketch of 5 dolphins jumping off each other in a very playful sort of a way. And I showed it to him. He said, okay, I'm giving you 15 days to do this. 15 days. It was a 12-foot sculpture in stainless steel, a material at that time which I was not very used to. I was more into iron and copper at that time. And I said 15 days, but I never say no to anything. So I said, okay. He's saying, look, 15 days or you keep the sculpture and I don't pay you. So that was like a gun on our head. At that time, my wife Kushnava used to work with us, and we got down to the research work, called multiple fabricators, showed them the design. I had a cardboard cutout in the studio which showed the size and the scale of the piece. They would come see it and say, yeah, of course it's possible. I said, how much time? So he said, minimum 3 months. I said, no, I don't have 3 months. Now, how much time do you have? So 15 days. So they would not even sort of wait, they would turn around and go away. 3 fabricators did that, and I started panicking. And then we got welding consultants, we got new machines, we got workers to work in 3 shifts together, day and night. I shifted my residence there. Kushnava used to stay there. My 2 kids were very small at that time, used to stay there. And we actually shifted lock, stock and barrel to the studio. Noisy, grinding, cutting, heat, flames, so much. Believe it or not, in 13 days we completed those dolphins and we installed it over there. So it's just one of the time things. Now that I look back, I can't even imagine doing it in a month. Literally, it's just something happened. Everything came together, and touch wood, it just sort of completely made the client happy. His dad was happy. It was his birthday in 15 days. That's why he wanted it there. The island was inaugurated, and it still stands there very proudly, and I'm very happy about it. So one of the first pieces I made was a wood carved piece, which was 4 African heads, and I took it home to show dad and mom. They were very happy till they found out that I had cut up one of the chairs which was theirs, and I'd carved these 4 heads from it. So that wasn't too pleasing for them, but I loved it. The first piece for me which sold was in 1983. I did a horse head from metal scrap, and a very good friend of ours and an architect called Dara Mistry had come home for dinner that day. He saw it and he said, do you want to sell it? And I said, I have not made it for selling. I had no idea that things like this would sell. And he said, I'll give you 2,000 rupees. At 1983, 2,000 rupees was a hell of a lot, and to me, it would be my first income. So I asked Dad, I said, what do I do? He's saying he wants the horse for 2,000 rupees. So Dad said, sell it. He's a good friend, and of course he'll keep it properly. And so that was how it began. The first horse to be sold was to architect Dara Mistry. It was titled Aspasia, from the legendary horse that our prophet Zarathustra had sort of resurrected from the dead. And it was wonderful. It was a wonderful feeling, totally. My first show happened in 1993 at the Jahangir Art Gallery, and it was wonderful. When I see the photographs of the opening at that time, it was inaugurated by our sheriff, Mr. Nana Chudasama, and his wife Munira Chudasama. It was a big thing for me. Of course, Dad had arranged everything. I didn't know anyone at that time. And when I look back at the photographs, I see the only people who were there during the first show inauguration were my close friends, my family, my neighbors from the colony, and people who Dad would knew and all that. And it's been such a lovely thing. From that little small opening of 100 people, now I have openings where there are maybe 600, 700 of them. But it's wonderful to see that everything that you do, if you persevere it, it grows slowly, and then you move from one scale to the other. It was a wonderful feeling. People ask me, was it challenging then for a sculptor or now? I would say it's the same. If I put myself in a new sculptor, an artist's shoes today, I would say it's the same. The struggle would be the same. There are a lot more artists around, but if you do phenomenal work, you're going to shine out more than the others anyway. And one thing that has changed is it's become more commercial. Art galleries are more. The idea that art needs to be made only to be sold is more, and that's the misconception which young artists have. They don't realize that when we started our work, we were selling at pittance. We were selling it at less than what you'd spend on a meal today probably. But when they see the prices around and when they see what artists are charging around, right from the first show, or even in the group show that they participate, they put ridiculous pricing on their artworks, and which is an absolute no-no. The art buying public is very intelligent. I am very careful to control my prices as I go along gradually. Of course, I increase them, but increase them very gradually. Do not jump up to some ridiculous amount where people say that how are you justified in sort of asking for something like this, you know? So the struggle, I would say, is absolutely the same. The amount of effort you have to put in is absolutely the same. It is your effort and your work which will show, nothing else. And that is what matters. That's it. In terms of scale, you know, I work in large scale. Currently, as we speak, just before the lockdown, I installed a 15-foot bull, a bronze cast bull in Worli. It is all tied up in gunny bags right now. You can't see it because it was supposed to have been inaugurated on the 23rd, and then of course everything sort of shut down. So it's still lying in wraps, but it will open up soon. And I love working in large scale. Everyone knows that. So which has been my largest piece? So in terms of the tallest, I did a 60-foot sculpture. Unfortunately, it was cut up and sort of sent away like the Vikrant. And it was a temporary sculpture which was used for the launch of a vehicle by Jaguar for F-Pace. And I actually made it in a way that the vehicle would go up on the sculpture. The tall boom of the sculpture had got a lot of gobos and lighting effects and all that. It was a one-time use sculpture made to launch a vehicle which was powerful, which was strong, which needed to make an impact. And it's wonderful. It's there on YouTube. It's called the F-Pace Jaguar Mumbai launch. And wonderful how it went off. And it was such a learning curve for me too, to make a 60-foot sculpture. It's a structural and a sculptural sort of amalgamation which came together. I had to be careful that when that car goes on top, the sculpture doesn't go down, and it didn't. Everything went well. And it was wonderful to do sort of work in that scale. In terms of volume, my largest piece hangs from a ceiling in Pimpri. It's for an IT building called Om Chambers. It's 25 feet diameter and it weighs 3.5 tons. And it's basically a series of metal plates all sort of put together into a large orb. And that, in terms of volume, would be the largest piece that I've made. The challenge it had for me to make at the studio, open it out and put it back again. I mean, that was so much fun and it was so difficult. And believe me, for anyone creative, more difficult is more fun. Remember that. So it was so much fun to sort of put it together, one plate at a time. The kind of numbering that I had to do on each bolt as to know what connects with what, like a giant Meccano set, was wonderful. That was a task by itself. That took me 3 months to make, okay? And it took me about 20 days to assemble that site just because of the sheer size of it. It's 360 different parts, all strung by thin stainless steel cables, multiple of them, so that in totality they carry a weight of 3.5 tons. The Jaguar F-Pace sculpture, which was 60 feet tall, which I spoke to you about, that took me about 30 days to make. They didn't have too much time, and it was something that was done very fast. It was the whole event was fast moving. It was supposed to be made fast. The car was supposed to have been gone on it fast. Impact was fast, and then it was out. Then it lived its life, you know. So the process of making a sculpture, it's very erratic. It's what frame of mind you are in. So basically I can outline it into two general ways. One is when you're working for an exhibition. There is no end client in mind, so whatever you make comes completely from within you. The subjects are yours, the size is yours, the scale is yours, material is yours. You do not need to visualize where this piece is going to be to adhere to those norms. Okay, so there I don't even do sketches. I start directly with the metal. I sometimes do a little chalk diagrams on the floor just to get the scale right and just to make out if things are going well. And then of course you design it. There are no sketches for that, absolutely none. I don't have to show anyone the sketches. But when it comes to a commission piece, the sketch is done first. This is only so that the client and the architect knows what I'm doing, what I'm making, and how it's going to come out in the final sort of sketch. I still don't do computer renditions. I am totally away from that. I still depend on my just charcoal sketches, nice bold lines, enough to sort of give the client an idea. Some of my biggest works have only sort of gone through only with one little sketch on an A4 size paper, literally, you know. So what triggers me sometimes is also my wordplay. I love punning and it comes automatically to me. Believe me, there's so many times when people get irritated with the amount of times I keep on cracking these silly jokes along the way, but it comes very naturally to me and I just can't resist it. So I also use it in my sculptures, like you've seen. God Nose, which is a large nose, a very prophetic sort of a nose with two eyebrows which look like the angel wings, and it's got a halo on top. So it's called God Nose. And then of course one of my favorite ones is these people sitting on a roll of newspaper with torn newspapers with things which are cut out, and I call it No News is Good News. There is a series of these electrical fans walking one behind another called fan following, and I love doing that because I love humor basically. And I try to instill it in my sculptures as well. Another thing I love doing, which you will know if you followed my work, is balancing. Balancing not in terms of swaying. I also love that. I have done that. I have done a 12-foot long, two figures holding each other's hand, where the base is only, let's say, about 4 inches and the whole figure just sort of moves. It's called Cantilever Alone. It's a boy holding a girl's hand. There's a little bit of wordplay in that as well. And all my pieces seem to be jumping out, and I love it when they are top heavy and they stand on one little toe, just to give that idea of motion and the idea of amazement to the viewer as to how the hell is it standing. That's what I like to achieve. And these balances, these wordplay, this little humor that I infuse makes the piece complete in terms of my vision. Another kind of pieces that I do, which I find are extremely difficult and hence extremely enjoyable as well, is the optical illusionary pieces, where you see a very abstract sort of a form. You don't know what the hell it is. It just looks like a very abstract form. But then I have a little mirror and a peephole through which you see. And when you look through it, you see one entire form. The first piece I did was that of a crucifix, and it was about 12 feet tall. And all you had to do was, there was this mirror at 45 degrees which actually changed your line of vision. So you had to see it from here. The vision would bounce this way and you'd see the entire form of crucifix coming through. The concept is very simple. It's about destroying your depth of field when you close your one eye. So it looks amazing, it looks magical, and it's fun for me because I love seeing the amazement on the viewer's face when they see it, and when they go in the mirror, they look in the peephole and they say, huh, they gasp again. And I know I've achieved what I wanted to do. Someone had said that an ideal city, a city that works wonderfully, is not when every resident has his own car, but when every resident is so confident in the public transport system that he abandons his car and uses that. And so many cities have achieved it. Unfortunately, we have not been able to do so. The metro work is on. Let's see where we are headed. But I would love to see pieces of art all around. I would love to see every footpath, every sidewalk, every divider full of plants and clean and devoid of hawkers and stuff like that. I'm not saying throw them off. Put them in designated zones. There is a way of planning the city in such a way that we can have wonderful pockets which we go through. I keep on repeating this. geographically, we have the finest city in the world, believe it or not. Our bays that we have, the way we can develop our beachfronts with restaurants and boardwalks, and you see Marine Drive with its Art Deco architecture. If we can light it up, it can look like Miami. I'm telling you, we've got such tremendous potential. The road from your VT station to Regal and the Causeway, if you clean it out and if you sort of get it off all the hoardings and make it pedestrianized, you can make it into one of the finest places in the world. Develop Fountain as a plaza, make it into a sort of a space where you have these food trucks and you have musicians around, where your people, your tourists come and sort of hang around, walk around together. So many things we can do. And I find one thing very important: you need a cycle track. You need a beautiful cycling track all around the city. That's something that you want. You have got no idea how many people will abandon the vehicles if you give them a good cycling track. Believe me, it's uncanny. I mean, I used to go cycling every Sunday morning, every day. In fact, in the morning, I've stopped because of the kind of pollution there is. Of course, now because of the lockout, it's completely gone. But if we sort of, give proper lanes, proper sort of disciplined signals to vehicles and sort of plan our infrastructure in that way, our city can be one of the finest cities in the world. It has all the potential of becoming that. We need a little strict governance and we need to get our act together.